Emily Carter pressed her trembling hand flat against the paper and signed. $300. That was the price of her future written in ink on a rancher's contract, while her mother wept quietly in the corner, and a man she'd never met counted out bills like he was purchasing livestock. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She folded her coat tight around her shoulders, walked out into the Kansas blizzard, and climbed into a stranger's wagon without looking back. She was 19 years old, and she had just been sold. If this story moved something in you, please subscribe to our channel right now and follow Emily's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Every single comment means the world to us. Now, let's go back to that snowbound Kansas winter and find out what happens when a girl with nothing left to lose walks into a house full of people who have already given up. The wagon hit a rut in the frozen road, and Emily grabbed the sideboard to keep from sliding off the bench. The driver, a heavy-set man named Chet, who smelled of pipe tobacco and wet wool, hadn't spoken more than 20 words since they'd left Millhaven. He didn't seem interested in starting now. She didn't mind. There was nothing she wanted to say either. She kept her eyes on the white plains stretching out in every direction, flat and merciless and endless under a sky the color of dirty pewter. The wind came in sideways and found every gap in her coat collar, every crack in the old wool blanket someone had thrown across the seat before she climbed up. She pulled it tighter and told herself she wasn't cold. She told herself a lot of things in those first 2 hours on that wagon. She told herself her mother would be all right. She told herself $300 was enough to save the farm, enough to get through February, enough to buy seed in the spring. She told herself this was a job, just a job. People took jobs in strange places all the time. People left home. It wasn't the same as being sold. But somewhere around the first hour, she stopped telling herself things and just watched the snow. The contract had been simple. 6 months of service to one Daniel Hayes of the Hayes Cattle Ranch, located some 14 miles north of Millhaven. In exchange, her family's outstanding debt to Silas Dunmore, $312 accumulated over 2 drought years, would be considered paid in full. Emily would cook, clean, and care for the children. She would be given a room, meals, and a modest wage of $2 per month, kept in account for her return. She had not been allowed to read the full contract before signing. Her mother had said, "Emily, please, it's only 6 months." And Emily had looked at the man holding the pen. Not Dunmore himself, but one of his clerks, thin-fingered and careful. And she had thought about her mother's hands. How red they were, how cracked, how they shook in the mornings now. And she had taken the pen. Chet pulled the horses to a stop so sudden that Emily lurched forward, catching herself on the dashboard board. "That's it," he said. She looked. Through the driving snow, she could make out a low, wide structure, a ranch house heavy and dark with a curl of smoke rising from a single chimney. A barn to the left. A fence line disappearing into white. Everything about it looked like it had been standing there a long time and had long since stopped caring whether it was noticed. "That's the Hayes place?" she asked. "That's it." "It looks—" She stopped herself. "Looks like what?" Chet said. She shook her head. "Nothing. Thank you for the ride." She climbed down before he could offer to help, which he showed no signs of doing. She pulled her small bag from the back of the wagon, and by the time she turned around, Chet was already clicking the horses back into motion. He didn't wave. She hadn't expected him to. She stood in the snow alone for a moment, bag in hand, wind pushing at her back like it wanted her to move faster. She walked toward the house. She knocked. For a long moment, nothing happened. She heard something inside, a sharp sound, a child's voice rising, and then cut off, and then footsteps. Heavy ones. The door opened. The man in the doorway was not what she'd imagined, though she couldn't have said exactly what she had imagined. Daniel Hayes was tall, wide through the shoulders, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a face that looked like it had been left out in the weather too long. He wasn't old. She put him at maybe 35, but there was something about his eyes that made him seem older. They were gray and flat, and they looked at her the way a man looks at something he didn't particularly want and can't particularly send back. "You're the Carter girl," he said. It wasn't a question. "Emily Carter," she said. "Yes, sir." He looked at her bag, then at her face, then out at the road where Chet's wagon was already a dark smudge in the white distance. "Come in," he said, and stepped back. The warmth hit her like a hand pushing against her chest. After the cold of the wagon, the inside of the house felt almost violent in its contrast. She stepped in and heard the door close behind her. There were children. She had known there would be children the contract had said, but knowing a thing and walking into a room and seeing it were different matters. The two youngest were boys, maybe 6 or 7 years old, identical in their dark hair and the matching suspenders they wore, and they were both standing on opposite sides of the kitchen table, staring at her with the unguarded curiosity that very young children can get away with. A girl older, maybe 11, with her father's coloring and her father's flat expression, stood near the stove with her arms crossed. And a boy of maybe 14 sat backward on a chair near the window, watching Emily with an expression that was something between contempt and assessment. No one spoke. Emily set her bag down near the door. "I'm Emily," she said to the room. "Emily Carter. I've come to help with the household." She paused. "I'm glad to meet you all." Silence. The older boy shifted in his chair. "We don't need help," he said. "Lucas?" His father's voice was quiet, but it had the kind of weight that didn't need volume. Lucas turned back to the window. The girl at the stove uncrossed her arms and then crossed them again, a gesture that seemed to be her version of a shrug. "I'm Anna," she said. Not warm, but offered. "Hello, Anna," Emily said. "Those are the twins, Eli and Cal." Anna nodded at the two boys who had not stopped staring. "You can't tell them apart unless you look at their ears. Eli's got a scar on his left one." "From what?" Emily asked. One of the twins she'd figure out which later grinned. "I bit him," he said proudly. The other one reached up and touched his ear. "He did," he confirmed with the solemnity of a witness at trial. Emily felt something loosen very slightly in her chest. "Well," she said, "I'll remember that." Daniel Hayes was standing near the hallway. He hadn't moved since she came in, hadn't offered her a seat or a cup of anything warm, or any of the ordinary gestures a person offers when someone comes a long way in the cold to their home. He said, "I'll show you to your room." "Thank you," she said. She followed him down a narrow hallway. He pushed open a door and she looked in. It was small. A cot with a quilt, a washstand, a hook on the back of the door, a single window with frost on the inside of the glass. "It isn't much," he said. He said it the way a man says a thing he's already decided he doesn't need to apologize for. "It's fine," she said. He nodded, started to leave, and then stopped. His back was to her. He didn't turn around when he spoke. "There's one more," he said. "You didn't see her. Sophie. She's 4. She doesn't talk." Emily waited. "She hasn't," he said, and then a pause so long she thought he might not finish, "since her mother passed." "I understand," Emily said quietly. He nodded once, and then he was gone, and Emily stood in her small room with her bag at her feet, and the frost on the window, and listened to the wind outside building itself up into something bigger. She gave herself 60 seconds. That was all she allowed. 60 seconds to feel whatever she was feeling, the strangeness of the room, the weight of the contract folded in her coat pocket, the image of her mother standing in the doorway of their farmhouse watching the wagon pull away, not waving, just watching. 60 seconds. Then she unpacked her bag. Dinner that first night was a quiet disaster. Not a shouting disaster. Not the kind that left marks anyone could point to later, just the kind that accumulates in silences. Emily had found the kitchen in a state that told its own story. Dried beans that had been soaking since God knew when, a loaf of bread that was 2 days past its welcome, a pot of something gray and congealed near the back of the stove that she decided not to investigate too closely. She'd done what she could with what was there. Salt pork, potatoes, a simple cornbread that she'd baked in the cast-iron skillet she found hanging near the fire. The twins ate like they hadn't seen food in a week, which told her something about the recent state of meals in this house. Anna ate carefully, watching Emily the whole time with those flat, careful eyes. Lucas ate nothing, sat with his arms on the table, and made a production out of not being interested in the food or the woman who had cooked it. Daniel Hayes ate in 4 minutes, set his fork down, and left the table without a word. And at the end of the table, in a chair slightly too big for her, sat Sophie. Sophie Hayes was 4 years old and small, even for that, with her father's dark hair cut straight across her forehead and eyes so dark they were almost black. She had been placed at the table before Emily came down by Anna. Emily guessed, and she sat there very still, her hands folded in her lap, watching the activity of dinner with the focused attention of someone who is not quite part of the scene they're observing. She had not said a word. She had not made any sound. She had accepted the plate Anna put in front of her and eaten perhaps a third of it in tiny, careful bites. Emily looked at her across the table and thought, "This is the one." She didn't know what she meant exactly. She just thought it. After dinner, Lucas disappeared without being dismissed. The twins ran some kind of chase through the back part of the house until something crashed, and Daniel's voice came from behind a closed door. Just his name, Lucas, a single syllable, and then quiet. Anna cleaned up without being asked, which spoke of habit worn deep, and then took Sophie by the hand and led her down the hall. Emily finished washing the dishes. When she was done, she stood at the kitchen table alone and took stock of what she had. The pantry was better stocked than it looked. At first, someone had put up preserves in the summer, green beans and tomatoes, and something amber-colored she'd need to taste to identify. There was flour, cornmeal, lard, dried beans, salt pork. Coffee, not much sugar. No butter currently, which meant no cow producing or no one managing it. She'd find out which. She made a list in her head. She made lists when she was uncertain. It helped her feel the shape of a problem. She was still standing there when she heard the footstep behind her. She turned. Lucas Hayes stood in the doorway in his stocking feet with his arms crossed over his chest. In the low light of the kitchen, he looked both older and younger than 14, older in his jaw, younger in the uncertainty around his eyes that he was working hard to hide. "I want you to know something," he said. "All right," Emily said. "We were managing fine," he said, "before you came. We didn't need anyone sent out here." "I believe you," she said. He blinked. That hadn't been what he expected. "I'm just saying, whatever Dunmore told you about this place." "Mr. Dunmore didn't tell me anything about this place," Emily said. "He told me about a debt and a contract. That's all." Lucas's jaw tightened. "It's not charity we need." "Good," she said, "because I'm not charity. I'm a cook and a housekeeper, and someone to look after your brothers and sisters. That's what I'm here for. Nothing else." She paused. "And for what it's worth, Lucas, the beans you've been soaking need salt, and they've been going too long. I'm going to start them fresh tomorrow. The bread I'll have done before your father comes in from the morning feeding." He looked at her for a long moment. "You don't have to pretend you're glad I'm here," she said. "I'm not asking you to, but I am asking you not to make it harder than it has to be. That's all." Another long look. Then he turned and walked back down the hall, quiet in his stocking feet. Emily let out a breath. The next morning she was up before the sun. She'd lain awake most of the night, listening to the wind and the particular sounds of a strange house. The way the walls settled, the way a draft moved through somewhere near the floorboards, the distant sound of one of the twins talking in his sleep. She'd finally given up on sleep around 4 and gotten dressed in the dark and gone to the kitchen. She built the fire up and started the coffee first because, in her experience, coffee was the opening argument in any negotiation with a difficult morning. Then she went to work on the bread. She heard Daniel Hayes before she saw him, boots on the floor, the particular rhythm of a man who walks like the ground owes him nothing. He came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw her at the table with her hands in the dough. She didn't look up. "Coffee's on," she said. A pause. Then the sound of him moving to the stove, the sound of the pot, a cup being taken down from the shelf. She could feel him standing there, drinking it, watching her work. The silence between them wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile. It was more like two people measuring a distance neither of them was sure how to cross. "You didn't have to be up this early," he said finally. "I know," she said. "I usually start the morning myself. The boys eat before school. Anna takes Sophie." "I'll take Sophie," Emily said. "Starting today, if that's all right. Give Anna a bit of a break from it." Silence. "She's particular," he said. "Sophie. She doesn't take to people easy." "I've got time," Emily said. She heard him set the cup down. "I want to be clear with you, Miss Carter." His voice was flat and deliberate. "This arrangement, it's about the children, getting this household running proper again. That's all it is." "I know what the contract says," she said. She still didn't look up from the dough. "Good," he said. "Mr. Hayes," she said then, and this time she did look up, meeting his gray eyes across the kitchen. "I signed that contract because my family needed the money, not because I had any other intention. So we understand each other." Something moved across his face that she couldn't read. He picked his hat up off the hook near the back door. "Breakfast at 6:30, he said. "It'll be ready," she said. He went out. She went back to the bread. By the end of that first week, she had learned the particular architecture of the Hayes household, the way you learn any difficult geography, not all at once, but in pieces accumulating. The twins. Eli was the one with the scarred ear. Cal was the one who laughed louder, were not difficult so much as they were in perpetual motion. They required management, not discipline. She found that giving them specific things to do channeled the energy usefully. Eli fetched wood. Cal carried water. They both liked to feel necessary, and once she understood that mornings got simpler. Anna was the harder case. Not unkind. There was nothing unkind about Anna exactly, but deeply quietly watchful. She had been running this household in her way since her mother died, and Emily understood without being told that Anna had her own ideas about how things should be done, and her own grief about being relieved of the burden. It was a complicated thing to lose something you'd never wanted in the first place. Emily didn't try to push her. She asked questions instead. "Anna, where do you keep the good soap?" "Anna, which of the twins is more likely to eat his vegetables without argument?" "Anna, what does your father take in his coffee?" She made Anna the authority on the household's details because she was, and because acknowledging it cost Emily nothing, and mattered to Anna more than either of them said out loud. Lucas. She mostly left alone except to give him a nod in the morning, and make sure there was always something warm on the stove when he came in from whatever work he'd been doing. On the third day, he ate 2 servings of dinner without comment. She counted that a victory and told no one. And then there was Sophie. Sophie was something Emily hadn't been prepared for, and she'd thought she'd prepared for everything. The little girl didn't cry, didn't complain, didn't reach for things she wanted. She moved through the house like a small, serious ghost always nearby, but never quite in the room, always present, but somehow at the edge of wherever the life was happening. She ate what was put in front of her. She let Emily dress her in the mornings without resisting or helping. She followed instructions communicated by gesture without difficulty. But she did not speak. Emily had known children who were shy. She'd known children who were slow to warm. She'd never known a child who seemed to have simply set the whole apparatus of language aside. The way you set aside a tool you've decided you don't need anymore. On the 4th morning, Emily was at the stove, and Sophie was sitting at the table watching her and Emily started talking. Not to Sophie exactly, just talking. About what she was making, about what went into biscuits, and why lard made better biscuits than butter, about how her own mother had taught her to make them on a winter morning when Emily was not much older than Sophie was now. She talked the way you talk to fill a room that's too quiet, not expecting an answer, not looking for one. Sophie watched her the entire time with those dark eyes. When the biscuits came out of the oven, Emily set one on a small plate, spread a thin layer of preserves on it, the amber ones, which turned out to be peach. Good peach put up carefully by a woman who had known how, and set it in front of Sophie. Sophie looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up at Emily. Emily said, Your mama put those peaches up, didn't she? Sophie's eyes went very wide and very still. She must have known how to do it right, Emily said quietly. Because they're real good. You can taste the care in them. She sat down across from Sophie. I think she'd want you to have them. I think she'd want you to eat 'em up and not feel bad about it. Sophie looked down at the biscuit. She picked it up and took a small bite. Emily didn't say anything else. She went back to the stove and kept her back to the table and blinked at the wall for a moment just once fast before she had herself sorted out again. She heard behind her the smallest possible sound. Not a word, but a breath that had something in it, not quite a sigh, not quite a sound, but something that belonged to the same family as both. She didn't turn around. She just kept cooking. It was on the 6th night that the real trouble started. Emily had been in the pantry taking stock of what they'd need from town when she heard the front door and then voices Daniel's and another one she didn't recognize. Lower, with a kind of self-satisfied weight to it that she'd heard before in men who had money and knew it. She came out of the pantry slowly staying near the hallway, not stepping into the main room, but close enough to hear. Just checking in on my investment, the unfamiliar voice was saying, making sure the arrangement is satisfactory. The arrangement is fine, Daniel said. His voice had gone flat in a way that was different from his usual flatness. Colder, more deliberate. Good, good. And the girl Carter's girl she's working out? A pause. She's doing her job, Daniel said. Only 6 months, of course. A small sound that might have been a chuckle. Dunmore's being very generous, I think you'll agree, considering the alternative for the family. Emily stood very still in the hallway. What do you want, Patterson? Daniel said. Nothing at all, just a social call. I wanted to make sure you understood the full terms. The girl doesn't leave before the 6 months are up. Not for any reason. She leaves early, the debt comes back on her mother. Full amount plus penalties. Another pause. Just making sure that was communicated clearly. It was communicated, Daniel said. Now I'd thank you to get off my property. A long silence. Good night, Hayes, Patterson said pleasantly, and then the sound of the door. Emily stepped back into the pantry and stood in the dark among the preserved peaches and the flour sacks and the silence. 6 months not for any reason. She'd known that. She'd known what the contract said more or less. But hearing it spoken out loud in that voice, that comfortable, weighted voice that had no concern at all for what it was saying because it had never needed to worry about what things cost. Something in her chest went hard and still. She breathed in the cold air of the pantry. She thought about her mother, about the farm, about the seeds in spring. She thought about Sophie's face over a biscuit spread with peach preserves. She set her jaw and went back to the kitchen to finish the dishes. She was still at the sink when Daniel Hayes came in from where he'd been standing near the front window. She heard him cross the room and stop somewhere behind her. He didn't speak right away. You heard that, he said finally. It wasn't a question. Enough of it, she said. A pause. I want you to know. He stopped, cleared his throat, started again. What Patterson said, how he said it, that's not how I think of this arrangement. I appreciate that, Emily said. She kept washing. I didn't set out for it to be the way it sounds, he said. The words came out rougher than she thought he intended, like they'd had to fight to get out. Dunmore came to me, said he had a girl willing to work, needed a placement, said her family was in trouble. I needed help with the children. It seemed... He stopped again. It seemed straightforward. She turned around then and looked at him. Mr. Hayes, she said, I signed that contract of my own will. My mother didn't force me to, and Mr. Dunmore didn't put a gun to my head. I made a choice. It's not the choice I'd have made in a different world, but I made it, and I don't regret it. So you don't need to explain yourself to me. He looked at her for a long moment with those gray eyes that she was starting to understand had a lot more going on behind them than they let on at first glance. All the same, he said, I want you to know, you're not a purchased thing in this house, whatever that contract says. The wind outside hit the side of the house hard enough to rattle the window. Emily held his gaze. "I know what I am," she said quietly, "and I know what I came here to do. Let's just make sure I do it right." She turned back to the sink. "Good night, Mr. Hayes." Another pause, long enough that she wasn't sure he was going to go. Then his boots crossed the floor, and she heard the hallway door close behind him. She stood at the sink with her hands in the cooling water and looked at the dark window in front of her, her own reflection faint and ghostly against the snow-filled black outside. She had signed her name on a cold morning in a stranger's office, while her mother cried quietly in the corner. She had ridden 14 miles through a blizzard on a bench next to a man who hadn't spoken to her once. She had walked into a house full of grief and silence, and walls built up by 4 children against the world that had taken their mother. And in 6 days, she had learned this: the walls were real, and they were thick, and they had been built by people who needed them. But walls, she knew, were not permanent things. She'd grown up in Kansas. She knew what cold and patience and the slow work of a careful hand could do to something frozen. She dried her hands on her apron. She banked the fire. She went to bed. She was 2 weeks into the Hayes Ranch when the town got its first good look at her. It happened because of eggs. They were out of eggs, and the nearest place to get them was Halverson's General Store on the main road through Millhaven. And Daniel Hayes had looked at her across the breakfast table that morning and said, "Cal can take you in the small wagon if you need supplies," in the tone of a man reading from a list. So she'd gone. She should have known from the way Cal went quiet halfway into town. He was the louder of the twins, the one who laughed first and longest, and when he stopped talking mid-sentence and fixed his eyes on the road ahead, Emily felt it before she understood it. The women outside Halverson's saw the wagon before it stopped. There were 3 of them. She'd learn their names soon enough, but in that first moment, they were just a wall of wool coats and sharp eyes, and that particular stillness that means people have already been talking and are now waiting to see the subject of the conversation arrive in person. Emily climbed down from the wagon and told Cal to stay put and pushed the door of the store open like she'd been shopping there her whole life. The bell above the door announced her. Every head in the store turned. Mr. Halverson, a heavy-set man with a gray mustache and the careful expression of someone who wants to stay neutral in every situation, said, "Morning, miss," with genuine neutrality, which she appreciated. She told him what she needed: egg salt coffee, a bolt of plain cotton if he had it. Sophie's dress had a tear in the hem that was going to become a real problem if left alone. He moved to fill the order without comment. It was one of the women who had been outside who came in first. She positioned herself near the bolts of fabric and said to no one in particular, "I heard Daniel Hayes had taken someone in." Emily kept her eyes on the cotton bolts. "Bought someone in, more like," said another voice closer to the door. Emily turned her head slowly and looked at the woman by the door. She was maybe 50, with a face that had been pretty once and had curdled into something that looked like concern but wasn't. "I'm Emily Carter," Emily said pleasantly. "I work for the Hayes family." "Work," the woman said, making the word do a lot of uncharitable labor. "That's right," Emily said. "We know about the arrangement, dear," the first woman said, with the particular warmth of someone delivering a blow softly. "The whole town does. You understand how it looks." "I understand how some people choose to look at it," Emily said. "That's a different thing." A silence settled over the store. Halverson slid her eggs carefully into the crate on the counter and kept his eyes on his work, like a man who had developed strong professional opinions about minding his own business. "Those children need a proper home," the woman by the door said, and her voice had shifted less social, more something else. "They need family, not a arrangement." "They have family," Emily said. "They have their father, and right now they have me. And I can tell you that as of this morning, all 4 of them ate a full breakfast, which is more than I can say for the state of that kitchen when I arrived." She picked up her crate. "I'll take the cotton too, please, Mr. Halverson. 2 yards. She paid. She walked out. Her hands didn't shake until she was back on the wagon seat with Cal beside her, and she tucked them under her thighs so he wouldn't see. "They talk about us a lot," Cal said quietly after a moment. I know, she said. Since Mama died, they talk about us a lot. She looked at him, this 6-year-old boy with his serious face and his father's gray eyes, and something moved through her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. What do you say when they talk? She asked. He shrugged. Nothing. Papa says don't give people your reaction. He says that's what they're fishing for. Emily looked at the road ahead. Your papa's a smart man, she said. Cal was quiet for a moment. Then, are you going to stay? The question landed like a stone in still water. She felt the rings of it spreading out. For as long as I said I would, she answered carefully. That's not what I asked, Cal said. She looked at him again, and he was watching the road with that same flat seriousness, and she thought that 6 years old was very young to have learned how to ask the real question inside the polite one. I'm going to be here, she said. Today and tomorrow. That's what I can promise you right now. He nodded slowly, like he was taking that and putting it somewhere careful for later. They rode the rest of the way in the particular quiet of two people who've said the important thing and don't need to fill the space after it. The shift with Lucas came so fast, she almost missed it. It was a Wednesday late afternoon, and she was in the kitchen with the mending when she heard a crash from outside, the particular sound of something going wrong, followed by a sharp cry that cut off fast. She was out the back door before she'd decided to move. Lucas was on the ground near the fence post, holding his arm against his chest, his face white and set in the rigid way of someone trying not to make a sound they think will embarrass them. Beside him on the frozen ground was a length of wire fencing, and the tool he'd been using to stretch it still spinning slightly. She crossed the yard and crouched down. Let me see. I'm fine, he said immediately. Lucas, I said let me see. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was just certain. The kind of certain that leaves no comfortable space for argument. He let her look. The wire had caught him across the forearm, not deep enough for stitches, she thought, but deep enough to bleed through his shirt. She could see from the angle of how he was sitting that he'd also come down hard on his knee. Can you stand? She asked. I can stand, he said with perhaps more edge than was necessary, and then proved it by standing, though his jaw tightened in a way that told her the knee was worse than he was admitting. She walked him inside. He sat at the kitchen table with the stiff endurance of someone determined to demonstrate that this was an inconvenience and not a crisis, and she cleaned the cut and bound it without ceremony and didn't ask him anything about what he'd been doing out there alone, trying to stretch fence wire in the cold. She already knew what he'd been doing. He'd been trying to do his father's work. He'd been 14 years old trying to hold a ranch together by pure stubbornness. When she tied off the bandage, he looked down at it for a moment and then up at her. My father doesn't know I was doing that, he said. No, she agreed. I'd rather he didn't. All right, she said. He blinked. Just all right? You're 14, Lucas, not 40. You don't have to be the one holding this place together. That's what I'm here to help with. His jaw worked. You're here to cook and clean, he said, but there was less heat in it than there used to be. I'm here to make things easier, she said, for whoever needs it to be easier, including you. He looked away out the window. His profile was so much like his father's, it was startling, the same set to the jaw, the same careful distance between what he felt and what he showed. She used to do that, he said very quietly. The bandaging, Mama. She had a particular way she'd tie it off so it didn't come loose. Emily kept very still. She'd tell me I was going to be the death of her, he said. Said it every time I got hurt. Every time. He paused. I used to think she'd say it forever. The kitchen was quiet except for the fire. She sounds like she was something, Emily said. Lucas looked back at her. His eyes were red at the edges, but his face was steady. She was, he said. She wasn't you. I want you to know that. I know that, Emily said. I'm not trying to be her. Good, he said. But he said it differently than he'd said things before. Not like a wall. More like a boundary agreed upon between two people who've decided to respect it. He ate 3 servings at dinner that night. Anna noticed and said nothing, which Emily understood was its own kind of acknowledgement. The twist that shook the foundation came on a Thursday night 14 days after Emily's arrival in the middle of a storm that had been building since noon. She'd been up later than usual. Sophie had had a bad night, waking twice without crying, just sitting up straight in her bed in the dark with her eyes open and her small hands gripping the quilt, and Emily had sat with her both times until she lay back down. She understood by now that Sophie's silences had different textures. Some silences were peaceful. Some were the kind that had weight in them, the kind that pressed down on a small chest until breathing itself took effort. She was back in the kitchen warming milk she hoped might help the little girl sleep when Daniel Hayes came in from the barn. He was later than usual, and the cold came in with him, and he stopped when he saw her at the stove, and for just a moment neither of them spoke. "Sophie," Emily said by way of explanation. He nodded slowly. He moved to the table and sat down still in his coat, and she set the milk aside for a moment and poured him coffee because he looked like a man who needed something in his hands. He wrapped both palms around the cup and said, "I owe you an apology." She turned. "For what?" "For the way Patterson spoke in my house last week. I should have addressed it sooner." "You told him to leave," she said. "I should have said more than that." He looked at the table. "The arrangement, I know it looks wrong. From the outside. I know what they're saying in town." "I've heard what they're saying in town," she said. He looked up. And I don't live in town," she said. "I live here, so it matters less to me than you might think." He was quiet for a moment, turning the cup. "Then Mrs. Aldridge came by today, while you were at the store with Cal." Emily stilled. She knew the name, the woman by the door. She said. He stopped. His mouth tightened. She said there were concerns being raised about the children's welfare. She used the word inappropriate. About the arrangement. The word landed in the room like something thrown hard. She said if there was ongoing impropriety, the county could be asked to look into the children's situation. He said it flatly without inflection, like a man reading a verdict he finds absurd but can't dismiss. Those were her words. Emily set down the wooden spoon. "They try to take the children," she said, not a question. "They try to use it," he said, "as leverage. Dunmore's behind it. Mrs. Aldridge doesn't move without Dunmore behind her." "What does Dunmore want?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "The ranch. He's wanted it for 3 years. Been buying up the smaller operations around here one at a time. This is how he works, finds a pressure point and presses on it until something breaks." Emily looked at him. The firelight moved across his face and showed her things she hadn't seen yet. Not just the exhaustion, but something underneath it. A man who has been holding a position alone for so long, he's forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand beside him. "And the contract," she said. "My being here, that's the pressure point he's using." "Yes." Flat, direct. At least he didn't try to soften it. "So, if I stay," she said slowly, "he uses my being here to come after the children. And if I leave, your mother loses the farm," he said. "And he's already got what he wanted from that end of it." She stood very still. Outside, the storm hit the side of the house hard enough to shake the window. "He's got us both," she said. Daniel looked at her across the table and said nothing, because there wasn't anything to say that would make it less true. But there was something else in his face, too. Something Emily noticed the way you notice a shift in the air before weather changes. He wasn't looking at her like she was a problem. He was looking at her like she was the only other person in the room who understood the full shape of what they were both standing inside. "I'm not leaving," she said. His eyes held hers. "I want to be clear," she said. "I am not leaving these children. Whatever Dunmore is trying to do, whatever Patterson says, I am not going to walk out of this house and let that man use my leaving as a weapon against your family. That is not going to happen." A long silence. The fire popped. "Miss Carter, he is counting on us being afraid of each other," she said. "He is counting on you wanting me gone before I cause more trouble, and on me being too scared of my mother's debt to push back. He has been very careful about how he set this up. I'll give him that. Daniel stared at her. But he made one mistake, she said. What's that? He asked quietly. He didn't account for the fact that I have nothing else to lose. She picked the wooden spoon back up. The milk's going to scorch. I need to take it to Sophie. She heard him very quietly let out a breath. Not quite a sound, but something real. She was halfway down the hall when she heard his voice behind her, low and rough, and carrying something in it she hadn't heard from him before. Not warmth exactly, but the place where warmth might eventually grow if given enough time and enough quiet mornings. Miss Carter? She stopped. Thank you, he said. She didn't turn around. Get some sleep. Mr. Hayes, she said. Tomorrow's going to be a working day. She went to Sophie. The little girl was sitting up again in the dark, both hands on the quilt that pressed silence in her chest. Emily sat on the edge of the cot and held out the warm cup, and Sophie took it in both small hands and drank it slowly without being asked. Emily sat beside her in the dark and didn't speak and didn't leave, and after a while, Sophie's breathing evened out and she lay back down. Emily watched her until she was sure. Then she stood to go, and that was when it happened. The thing that stopped her feet on the floor and stopped her breath in her chest and stopped everything, every calculation, every list, every careful accounting of what she was here to do and what she was not. Sophie's hand found her wrist. Just that. Just the small fingers closing around her wrist in the dark. Not a grip. Just a touch. Just a child's hand saying, "Don't go yet. Just stay." Emily sat back down. She stayed until the breathing deepened into sleep and the small hand loosened and fell away. And then she sat a little longer than that in the dark, with the storm outside and the fire low in the other room, and the whole sleeping weight of this broken, stubborn, quietly surviving household around her. She had told Cal she could promise today and tomorrow. Sitting in the dark beside Sophie's cot, she was beginning to understand that the problem with tomorrow was that it kept coming. And each time it came, she was still here. And each time she was still here, something in the house, slow, careful, almost invisible, continued to thaw. The morning after the storm, Silas Dunmore came to the ranch himself. Emily heard the horse before she saw the rider, and something about the particular unhurried quality of that approach told her this wasn't a neighbor stopping by. She was at the kitchen window when he came through the gate, a broad man in a good coat riding a horse that cost more than most families in Millhaven made in a year. He dismounted like a man who expects someone to hold his reins and was mildly surprised when no one appeared to do it. She had the door open before he knocked. He looked at her with the specific kind of smile that men like him carry, the way other men carry weapons always present, never warm. "You must be the Carter girl," he said. "Emily Carter," she said. "Mr. Dunmore." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You know who I am." "I know whose name is on my contract," she said. "Come in or don't. You're letting the cold in either way." She stepped back. He came inside. Daniel was already in the main room. She didn't know if he'd heard the horse too, or if he'd been up since before dawn, the way he sometimes was moving through the house with that particular quiet that belonged to men who've learned not to sleep deeply. He stood near the fireplace with his arms at his sides and his face arranged in a flatness that she was beginning to understand was not absence of feeling, but rather the complete containment of it. "Dunmore," he said. "Hayes." Dunmore looked around the room with the proprietary interest of a man calculating what something is worth. "I won't take much of your time. I came to check on our arrangement." "Our arrangement is fine," Daniel said. "Same as it was when Patterson checked on it 2 weeks ago." Dunmore smiled. "Patterson is overzealous. I prefer to handle matters myself." He turned and looked at Emily with the full force of his attention, which was considerable. "You've settled in well, I hear." "I do my job," she said. "Yes." He tilted his head slightly. "That's something I wanted to discuss, actually. There's been some talk, in town, about the nature of your position here. The county commissioner is a particular friend of mine, and he's expressed some concern." "About what exactly?" Emily said. "About the children's welfare." He said it gently with the practiced gentleness of a man who has learned to deliver threats in the tone of concern. A young woman living alone with a widower and 4 children under a financial contract, you can see how it raises questions. I can see how someone wanting to raise questions would find a way to, Emily said. Dunmore looked at her for a moment with something new in his expression, not quite respect, but the recalibration that happens when a person turns out to be more than the shape you assigned them. The simplest solution, he said, turning back to Daniel, is for the arrangement to conclude. I'm prepared to consider the debt satisfied if Miss Carter returns to Millhaven by end of week. No penalties. Clean accounts. The room went very still. Emily looked at Daniel. Daniel was looking at Dunmore. And the ranch, Daniel said. Dunmore spread his hands. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do, Daniel said. What happens to this ranch if I'm left without help for the children, and I can't manage both the operation and the household through the rest of winter? A pause that lasted exactly long enough to be an answer. I'm sure you'd manage, Dunmore said pleasantly. Emily stepped forward. Both men looked at her. Mr. Dunmore, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. I want to make sure I understand you correctly. You're offering to forgive my family's debt, the debt you created by buying it from 3 different creditors over 2 years, in exchange for me leaving this house before the contract term ends. Dunmore's smile didn't move. I'm offering a clean resolution for everyone involved. And if I decline? The smile stayed. Then the contract holds. Of course. A pause. And the county commissioner continues to hear concerns about the children's welfare. And those concerns will eventually require an official inquiry. And an official inquiry. He let the sentence open at the end, like a door he was inviting them to look through. Daniel took 1 step forward. It was only 1 step, but it changed the geography of the room completely. He wasn't a man who used his size as an argument. Often Emily had learned that much, which meant when he did it landed. Get out of my house, Daniel said. Quiet. Absolute. Dunmore held his ground for 3 full seconds, which told Emily he was braver or more foolish than he looked. Then he adjusted his coat and said, Think about it, Hayes. That's all I'm asking. Think about what's best for your children. He looked at Emily one more time. And for your mother, Miss Carter. He left. The door closed. Daniel stood with his back to her, and she watched his shoulders and the controlled stillness of a man managing something large. He's going to move faster now, Daniel said. He came himself. That means he's tired of waiting. What does he actually want? Emily asked. The ranch. The water rights. He turned around. There's a creek runs the eastern edge of my property, feeds 3 other properties south of here. He's been buying those up, but without my creek, they're worth half what he paid. He needs my land to make the whole thing work. And he can't buy you out. He tried, 2 years ago, right after Margaret died. His jaw tightened at the name a brief involuntary thing. I told him no, so he waited and found another way to press. Emily was quiet for a moment. The debt, she said. He manufactured it, bought up the notes, let the interest run, made sure my family couldn't pay it down, then offered me as the solution knowing I'd create exactly this problem for you. Daniel looked at her. How'd you work that out? Because it's what I'd do, she said, if I had no conscience and a great deal of patience. She moved back to the kitchen and picked up her apron. We need a lawyer. Daniel made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Emily. I know. Money. She tied the apron strings. But there's got to be someone in this county who'd take a case against Dunmore on contingency. Someone who's been wanting to nail him for years and just needed someone willing to stand up. That someone tends to end up in a very uncomfortable position in this county, he said. More uncomfortable than losing your water rights and your ranch, she said. He had no answer for that. She started on the breakfast. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, and she felt him working through something, not talking, just working the way he did things. Then he said, There's a man in Hayes City, retired judge, name's Calloway. He has a long memory and a personal grievance against Dunmore going back about 10 years. "Can you get to Hayes City?" she asked. "It's 2 days' ride." "Can you get to Hayes City?" she repeated. A pause. "Not and leave the ranch without someone to manage it." She turned and looked at him steadily. He looked back at her. "I'll manage it," she said. The word landed between them, and neither of them moved for a moment. And then Lucas appeared in the hallway in his socks, with his hair going in 4 directions, and said, "Is there coffee?" And whatever the moment was, it passed. But it didn't disappear. It just waited. The day that broke Emily Carter's patience and rebuilt it into something harder and more permanent was a Friday, 18 days after her arrival, when Mrs. Aldridge came to the ranch with 2 other women and a man Emily didn't recognize, who turned out to be a county welfare officer named Gibbs. She'd been out at the barn with Eli, checking on a hen that had stopped laying, and she came back to the house to find them already inside. Daniel was away at the south fence line. Lucas was at school with the others. Sophie was in the house. Sophie was alone in the house. Emily went through the back door at a pace that stopped just short of running. She heard voices from the main room, Gibbs flat and official, and Mrs. Aldridge threading gentle horror through every sentence, and then no child's voice. Because of course there was no child's voice, there was never a child's voice. From Sophie and Emily pushed through the kitchen doorway and stopped. Sophie was sitting on the small chair near the fireplace, with her hands folded in her lap, looking at the 3 adults in the room with those dark, unreadable eyes, and Mrs. Aldridge was crouched in front of her saying, "Sweetheart, can you tell me your name?" in the voice people use with animals they're trying not to startle. Sophie said nothing. "She doesn't speak," Emily said from the doorway. All 3 adults turned. "Miss Carter," Mrs. Aldridge said, rising. "We didn't realize. You came into this house without the owner's permission," Emily said, "with a county official, without any notice." She kept her voice even. "On what grounds?" Gibbs cleared his throat. He had a folder tucked under his arm and the wary manner of a man who has been sent to do something he's not entirely comfortable with. "We've received a welfare complaint regarding the minor children in this household. I'm required by county statute to investigate." "Fine," Emily said. "Investigate. I'll answer whatever you need answered. But you will not question that child without her father present. She is 4 years old, and she lost her mother less than a year ago, and she does not speak to strangers." "She doesn't speak at all from what I understand," Mrs. Aldridge said, and she said it with a kind of sad significance that made Emily's hands close at her sides. "She's healing," Emily said. "That's what children who've lost a parent do. They heal at their own pace, and they don't need strangers in their home making them feel like something's wrong with them." Mrs. Aldridge straightened to her full height. "Miss Carter, I think we all need to be honest about what this situation looks like. A purchased girl, a woman," Emily said, "who works here, under a legal contract. Living in the home of a widower with no other adult supervision. There is a 14-year-old boy," Emily said, "who does more work than most grown men I know. There are 6-year-old twins who have learned to chop kindling and carry water and set a proper table. There is an 11-year-old girl who has kept this household running through more grief than you or I have had to carry at her age. And there is a 4-year-old who has not spoken in months, but who, and I need you to hear this clearly, drank a full cup of warm milk last night and fell asleep in under 10 minutes, which is the first time that's happened since I arrived. These children are not failing. They are surviving. And they are beginning slowly, carefully, on their own terms, to do more than that." The room was very quiet. Gibbs was looking at his folder without reading it. Mrs. Aldridge had the expression of a woman whose argument has been removed from under her and is trying to find new footing. "Be that as it may," she started. "Be that as it may. Emily said, you need to leave, and when Mr. Hayes returns, he will be happy to speak with Mr. Gibbs at a properly scheduled time with notice given the way the law actually requires. Is that understood?" Another silence. Then Sophie from her chair by the fire did something she had not done in the presence of strangers since Emily had arrived. She reached out and took Emily's hand. Just that. Just her small fingers finding Emily's and closing around them. Everyone in the room saw it. Mrs. Aldridge opened her mouth and closed it. Gibbs cleared his throat again. We can schedule a formal visit," he said. "With Mr. Hayes present. That would be appropriate." He left first. Mrs. Aldridge followed, though not before turning in the doorway to give Emily one long assessing look that had shifted into something Emily couldn't entirely read. Not quite respect, not quite surrender, but no longer the comfortable certainty of a woman who is sure she's in the right. The door closed. Emily looked down at Sophie. Sophie was looking up at her with those dark, steady eyes, Emily's hand still held in both of hers. "Thank you," Emily said quietly, "for staying calm." Sophie's grip tightened very slightly, and then quiet as a single breath. Quiet as something that has been held a long time, finally being released. Sophie said, "Emmy." Not Emily. Emmy. One syllable different. Smaller. More particular. More hers. Emily went completely still. Sophie said it again. "Emmy." Testing it. Feeling the shape of it. Like someone who has found a word they've been looking for in a language they almost forgot they knew. Emily crouched down to Sophie's level. She didn't trust herself to speak for a moment. She looked at this small, serious-faced girl who had carried her silence like a stone for 7 months and who had just in the presence of 3 strangers and a threat chosen to set it down. "That's right," Emily said. Her voice came out rough at the edges. "That's me." Sophie looked at her for one more long moment. Then she leaned forward and put her small, dark head against Emily's shoulder. Emily closed her eyes and put her arms around her and held on. She allowed herself 45 seconds of that. Then she stood up, took Sophie to the kitchen, cut her a piece of bread with preserves, and sat down at the table, herself to think. Because Dunmore had escalated. Sending Gibbs was an escalation. Using the county welfare apparatus was an escalation. He was moving faster than she'd expected, which meant Daniel needed to get to Hayes City faster than either of them had planned. She was still working through the logistics when she heard hoofbeats in the yard, and Daniel came through the door with the cold still on him, and she could see from his face that he already knew something had happened. Lucas had passed him on the road back from school and told him. Of course he had. "Gibbs," Daniel said. "And Mrs. Aldridge," Emily said. "I sent them away. They'll come back with a scheduled appointment, which gives us time." Daniel took his hat off and set it on the table and stood there looking at it. "He's moving fast." "Yes," she said. "You need to go to Hayes City." "Emily, I managed this house today with those children and a county welfare officer and Mrs. Aldridge," she said. "I can manage it for 2 days while you ride to Hayes City and talk to a retired judge." He looked up from his hat. "Sophie," he said. Sophie is fine," Emily said. And then because it was his daughter and he needed to know, she said she spoke today, while Gibbs and Aldridge were here. Daniel went very still. "She said my name," Emily said, or her version of it. He didn't move for a long moment. His face went through something that was not quite visible, but was entirely present, a shift, a cracking, a return of something that had been locked away. He pulled his hand across his jaw and looked at the table. "Daniel!" It was the first time she'd used his name without the mister, and she heard herself do it at the same time he did. He looked up fast. "She's coming back," Emily said. "Your daughter is coming back, but you have to go fight for this family before Dunmore takes it apart one piece at a time." His jaw was set. His eyes were bright in a way she hadn't seen before. 2 days, she said. "Ride to Hayes City, find Calloway, come back with something we can use." He held her gaze for a long time. Long enough that she felt it land differently than a look usually lands, not with weight exactly, but with recognition. The look of a man who has been alone in a fight for a very long time and has just realized there is someone standing on the same side of it. "I'll leave at first light," he said. "I'll have food packed," she said. He nodded once, picked up his hat, and went to find Sophie. Emily stayed at the table. She heard it from this kitchen, the sound of a door opening and Daniel's voice saying Sophie's name, and then a small sound, unmistakably. Sophie, unmistakably Emmy, and then a long quiet, that had nothing empty about it. She got up and started on dinner. Lucas came in 20 minutes later, looked at her at the stove, and without preamble said, "He's going to Hayes City." "Yes," she said, "because of what Dunmore's doing." "Yes." Lucas was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do we do while he's gone?" She looked at him over her shoulder. 14 years old with his father's eyes and his jaw set, like he was ready for whatever she was about to say. "We do what we've been doing," she said. "We keep this house running. We keep those kids steady. We don't give Dunmore or Aldridge or anyone else a single thing to point at." "And if Gibbs comes back," Lucas said, "then you come find me," she said, "and I'll handle it." He looked at her for a moment, with something that was not quite the look he'd had when she arrived, not the cold assessment of a boy deciding whether to let something past his defenses. This was different. This was the look of someone who has already made a decision and is just now letting the other person see it. "Okay," he said. He washed his hands at the basin and set the table without being asked. And Emily stood at that stove and understood something she hadn't had words for until right now, that she had stopped being a stranger in this house somewhere between the bandaged arm and the peach preserves and the small hand finding hers in the dark. She hadn't noticed the moment it happened. That was the thing about belonging. It didn't arrive with an announcement. It arrived like warmth does in a room that's been cold too long. So gradually, you almost miss it, but you don't. Daniel left before sunrise. Emily heard him moving through the house in the dark, the careful footsteps of a man trying not to wake anyone, and she was already dressed and in the kitchen with the coffee on and the food packed in a canvas sack before he made it to the back door. He stopped when he saw her. She held out the sack without ceremony. "Biscuits and salt pork," she said. "Coffee in the flask. Don't stop in Millhaven. Ride straight through." He took the sack. He looked at her in the low firelight for a moment with that look she was getting, to know the one that said more than he was going to put into words. "The twins will try to skip their chores," he said. "Eli more than Cal." "I know. Lucas has been sleeping past 6 since—" "I'll have him up," she said. He nodded, picked up his coat, got to the door, and then stopped with his hand on the frame, his back to her. "I don't know what Calloway will say," he said. "I don't know if he can do anything." "I know," she said. "If this doesn't work, Daniel." She waited until he turned his head enough to hear her clearly. "Go find out if it works before you decide it doesn't." A pause. The closest thing to a smile she'd seen on him, not quite one, but the shape where one might eventually live. Then he was out the door and gone, and she heard the horse in the yard, and then the sound of hooves on frozen ground fading north. The house was very quiet. She poured herself a cup of coffee and drank it standing at the stove and made her list for the day. By noon, she had gotten the twins to split the morning wood, talked Lucas into mending the fence section near the east paddock that he'd started before his injury, helped Anna turn out the bedroom quilts for airing, and navigated Sophie through a breakfast, a walk to the barn to see the horses, and back inside for a rest, all without raising her voice once. She counted that a reasonable morning. It was during the afternoon quiet when Sophie was napping and the twins had worn themselves out, and Anna was reading by the window that Lucas came inside from the fence work and sat down at the kitchen table and said without preamble, "Tell me what's actually happening with Dunmore." She looked at him across the table. "I'm not a child," he said. "I know something's wrong. I know it's bigger than a welfare visit." She made a decision the way she usually made decisions, quickly on the evidence in front of her. The evidence in front of her was a 14-year-old boy who had been carrying the weight of a near adult for a year and who deserved something closer to the truth than a managed version of it. She sat down. She told him, not everything, but the shape of it, the water rights, the manufactured debt, the way Dunmore had engineered the entire situation from both ends. Lucas listened without interrupting, which was not his usual style, and she understood from his stillness that he was taking it in and sorting it, and that the sorting was serious work. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He used you," Lucas said. "As a lever, against us." "Yes," And your family. Yes. Lucas looked at the table. That's why you haven't left. Even when Aldridge came. Even when... He stopped. You could have left. Dunmore offered you a clean out. Yes, she said. But if you left, he'd have what he wanted from two directions at once. Lucas's jaw was set, and his eyes had gone somewhere distant. He'd have your family, and he'd have a reason to come after the ranch. That's right, she said. He looked up at her. So you stayed to protect us. She shook her head. I stayed because leaving was wrong. There's a difference. She paused. I won't let a man like Dunmore make my choices for me. If I leave because I've decided to, not because he engineered it. Lucas was quiet for another long moment. Then he said very quietly, My mother would have liked you. The words landed in the room like something irreplaceable set down gently. Emily didn't speak for a moment. That means something to me, she said. Truly. He nodded once and stood up. I'm going back to the fence, he said. I want it done before dark. I'll have dinner ready at 6, she said. He went. She sat at the table alone for a moment, and she thought about the particular kind of courage it takes to say the thing you most mean to a person you've spent 3 weeks deciding not to trust. She thought Lucas Hayes had more of it than most men twice his age. The second day without Daniel stretched longer than the first, not because anything went wrong. Nothing went wrong. The children ate and worked and did their lessons, and went to bed at reasonable hours. And Sophie said Emmy 4 more times once to ask for water once, when she woke from her nap. And Emily was there, and twice for no reason at all, except apparently because she wanted to. Which made Cal look up from his supper and say, She said a word, with the solemnity of a boy announcing something historic, which it was. Anna, who had been watching Sophie all evening with those careful eyes, said nothing until she was helping Emily clear the plates. Then she said without looking up, When she first stopped talking, I used to sit outside her door at night. I thought if she heard my voice enough, she'd remember how to use hers. Emily stilled. Did it help? She asked gently. I don't know, Anna said. Maybe she just needed time. She stacked a plate. Or maybe she needed you. Emily looked at this 11-year-old girl with the flat eyes and the old soul, and the way she carried love without making a show of it, and understood that Anna Hayes was one of the finest people she'd ever met. She needed you too, Emily said. Don't discount that. Anna shrugged in her way, but her mouth did something that was almost soft. It was near 9 that night, children all asleep. Fire banked the house settled when Emily heard a horse in the yard. She was on her feet before the thought completed. She went to the window. 1 horse, 1 rider. Daniel. She had the door open by the time he tied the horse, and he came across the yard fast, which told her something, and he came up the steps and into the house, and she stepped back to give him room, and looked at his face. He looked different. She couldn't name it immediately. Not relieved, not easy. Something more complicated than either. Like a man who has received news that is good but requires something of him. Calloway, she said. What did he say? Daniel took his coat off and hung it, and turned around. He says the original debt documents have problems. The way Dunmore structured the buyouts, there's a question about whether the interest calculations were legal under Kansas statute. Calloway knows the law. He says if we can get 3 of the other affected families to come forward, he can build a case that Dunmore's been running a debt scheme across the county for years. Emily let that land. Other families, she said. Like mine. Like yours. And 2 others he named that he's heard from before. He met her eyes. Including the Halverson family. She blinked. The general store. Dunmore holds their note too. Has for 4 years. He paused. Calloway is coming. He's riding down next week. He says he's wanted a reason to take Dunmore apart for 10 years, and he's not going to need much convincing. The breath she released was longer than she intended. That's good, she said. That's good. It's not over, Daniel said. Dunmore has friends in the county office. Calloway's retired, which means he doesn't have the bench anymore, just the knowledge of it. We'll need the families willing to stand up." "Halverson will?" she said. She was certain of it. She'd seen his face in that store when the women were talking about her. The careful neutrality of a man who is weighing something. "You think so? I think he's been waiting for someone to stand up first," she said. "People usually are." Daniel looked at her. Then he said, "Sophie." "She's speaking," Emily said. "She said my name. She said it to the twins at dinner tonight." She paused. "She's coming back, Daniel." He sat down at the kitchen table and put both hands flat on the wood and stared at them. The gesture was so unguarded, so far outside his usual careful containment, that she understood it was the weight of the past year finally finding somewhere to set itself down. She put coffee on. She gave him that. She put a plate of food in front of him and sat across the table, and they talked. Really talked, maybe for the first time, without contracts or threats or careful distances, about Calloway's plan, about what it would require, about the risk and the timeline, and what Dunmore was likely to do when he understood that the board had shifted. They talked for an hour. The fire settled low. The snow outside had stopped. At some point, Emily realized that it felt exactly like what it was. Two people on the same side of a problem working it together. Not employer and employee. Not contractual parties. Two people. She noticed it the way you notice when a room has gotten light without your seeing the sun come up. She was the one who said, "You should sleep. You've ridden 2 days." He looked up from the table. "You haven't slept yourself." "I've been here," she said. "That's different from riding." "Is it?" He was looking at her with that recognition she'd seen before, but steadier now, more certain of itself. "What you did here the 2 days I was gone. Lucas told me when I came in. About Aldridge, about Gibbs, about what you said to them." He paused. "About how you stood in that room with Sophie, and you didn't move." "I wasn't going to let them make her feel wrong," Emily said simply. "No," he said. "You weren't." He held her gaze. "You're not what I expected, Emily Carter." She looked at him steadily. "What did you expect?" "Someone temporary," he said. And the word landed differently than it would have a month ago. Like he understood now that it wasn't what he'd expected, and that the understanding had changed something. She didn't answer that. She just stood up and took the coffee cups to the basin, because some things didn't need answering so much as they needed time. The trouble came the very next morning, and it came from the one direction Emily hadn't fully prepared for. A wagon in the yard before breakfast. She heard it and felt something in her chest contract. Not fear exactly, but the animal knowledge that this was going to cost something. She looked out and saw Gibbs, and behind him a woman she hadn't seen before, and behind the woman a man from the county with a look of professional regret, and sitting in the back of the wagon, small and pinched and wretched, Emily's mother. Emily was out the door so fast she didn't feel the cold. "Mama," she said. Her mother was pale and thin, and had the look of someone who had been awake for 2 nights being afraid. She reached down from the wagon and took Emily's hands. "Emily, sweetheart, I'm sorry I didn't." They came to the farm and said, "What is this?" Daniel was behind Emily. His voice had the weight in it. Gibbs cleared his throat. He had the manner of a man doing a job he has been told to do by someone with more power than him, which was not quite the same as doing something he believed in. "Mrs. Carter has come voluntarily to—" "She doesn't look voluntary," Emily said. "To discuss the contract arrangement." Gibbs continued. "And whether it was entered into under undue pressure." Emily looked at her mother. "Did you come voluntarily, Mama?" Her mother looked at Gibbs, then at Emily. "They said if I didn't come, the debt paperwork would be filed with the county clerk today, and the farm would be posted for sale by end of week." There it was. Dunmore had found her one pressure point she hadn't guarded. Not the children, not the contract. Her mother. Emily stood in the yard with the cold on her face and felt the full shape of the trap for the first time, how long it had been in place, how many angles it covered, how carefully Dunmore had constructed it so that every exit was also a door, leading somewhere worse. She felt it. She stood in it. And then she let it finish, because she'd learned that you have to feel the full weight of a thing before you can decide whether it can be moved. She turned to Gibbs. "Is Mr. Dunmore here?" she asked. "Or is he making my 60-year-old mother do his work for him from the back of a county wagon?" Gibbs had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Dunmore sent them," Daniel said quietly from behind her. Not a question. "He sent them," Emily confirmed. She looked at her mother again. "Mama, come down from that wagon. You're coming inside. Emily, you're coming inside," she said. "We're going to have breakfast, and then we're going to talk about what happens next. But you are not sitting in the back of that wagon like your cargo." She helped her mother down herself. She felt how thin her mother's hands were, how much weight she'd lost since last autumn, and she felt the anger rise in her chest, clean and cold and completely purposeful, not hot, not reckless, but the kind of anger that knows exactly what it wants to do. She walked her mother past Gibbs, past the county man with his professional regret, past all of it, and through the front door of the Hayes ranch house, and she sat her mother at the kitchen table. Then she came back to the doorway. Daniel was standing in the yard with Gibbs speaking quietly, and she could see from the set of his shoulders that he was keeping himself in the same controlled flatness she'd seen when Dunmore was in the house. Gibbs was talking. Daniel was listening. She stepped out. "Mr. Gibbs," she said, "I want to tell you something clearly so that you can take it back to whoever sent you here." She waited until she had his full attention. "I entered my contract of my own free will. My mother did not coerce me, and she was not party to it. She is a guest in this house as of this morning, not evidence in anyone's case. And the welfare of the children in this house," she gestured toward the door, "is not your concern, because I have 4 children eating hot meals and sleeping in warm beds and going to their schooling, and 1 4-year-old who spoke yesterday for the first time in 7 months. If that is inadequate welfare, I would like someone to explain to me what adequate looks like." Gibbs stared at her. "The man who sent you here," Emily continued, "is trying to take a family's land and livelihood by using a grieving widower's need for household help as a legal crowbar. That is what is actually happening. And I think you know that. I think that is why you look the way you look right now." She held his gaze. "When Judge Calloway arrives next week, he's going to want to talk to anyone with county authority who was involved in this process. I suggest you think about which side of this you want to be on when that conversation happens." She heard a sound to her left. She turned. Lucas was standing in the doorway of the house, watching. He'd heard all of it. His arms were crossed and his jaw was set, and he looked in that moment so much like his father that it was startling. He gave her a single nod. Gibbs looked at the county man. The county man looked at the wagon. Some silent communication passed between them that landed on the side of retreat, because Gibbs said, "We'll be in contact, Mr. Hayes," and climbed back up to the wagon seat, and the wagon turned and went back down the road. Daniel came to stand beside Emily. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Calloway needs to get here faster," she said. "I'll send a wire from town today," he said. She nodded. She turned to go back inside, and his hand caught her arm just briefly, just a touch, the kind that stops a person without holding them. She turned. He looked at her with everything he couldn't organize into sentences: gratitude, and something larger than gratitude, and the recognition of a man who has watched someone stand in the open and not flinch, and understands for the first time what it costs. "Thank you," he said, for the second time. But it was different this time. The first thank you had been the end of a conversation. This one was something closer to a beginning. She looked at him for a moment. "Your mother's inside," she said. "She needs coffee, and she needs to hear that this is going to be all right." She paused. "And it is going to be all right, Daniel. I need you to believe that too." He held her gaze. "I'm starting to," he said. She went inside. Her mother was sitting at the table watching the kitchen doorway, and when Emily came in, she opened her mouth, and Emily said, "Don't apologize, Mama," before she got a word out. Her mother closed her mouth. Emily poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down. And from down the hall, small and clear, and certain as anything Emily had ever heard, came Sophie's voice, "Emmy." Just that. Just her name in the small voice of a child who had decided that silence was no longer the thing she needed. Emily looked at her mother across the table. Her mother was looking toward the hallway with an expression that said she understood something about this place without needing it explained. "That's Sophie," Emily said quietly. "She didn't speak for 7 months." Her mother looked at her. "Until you," she said. Emily didn't answer. She just got up to go to Sophie. But she was smiling, and she didn't bother to hide it. Judge Calloway arrived on a Tuesday 3 days after Daniel sent the wire, and he arrived not quietly, but with the particular purposeful energy of a man who has been waiting a long time to do something and has finally been given permission. He was older than Emily expected, mid-60s, lean and dry as cured leather, with white hair and the kind of eyes that had spent 30 years watching people lie in courtrooms, and had gotten very good at knowing when it was happening. He shook Daniel's hand, looked at Emily for a long moment, and said, "You're the one who stood up to Gibbs." "Someone had to," she said. He smiled for the first time. "Good answer." He sat up at the kitchen table with his papers and his reading glasses and a cup of Emily's coffee, and for 2 hours he talked, and Daniel listened, and Emily stayed near enough to hear everything. The picture Calloway laid out was larger than she'd imagined. Not just their family, not just the Hayes Ranch, but 11 properties across 3 counties, all carrying debt that Dunmore had structured with interest rates that violated Kansas usury law, all bought up quietly over 5 years, all timed, so that the pressure arrived at moments of maximum vulnerability. Drought, death, hard winter. Silas Dunmore had been patient, and he had been precise, and he had been until now invisible inside his own legality. "The problem with men like him," Calloway said, setting down his coffee, "is they believe the law belongs to them. They use it so long as their own tool that they forget other people can pick it up too." "Can we fight him?" Daniel asked. "We can do more than fight him," Calloway said. "If Halverson signs on, and if the Carter debt documents hold what I think they hold, we can take him apart." He looked at Emily over his glasses. "Your mother still have her copies of what she signed." "She keeps everything," Emily said. "Every piece of paper that's ever come into that house." "Good woman," Calloway said. "Tell her to bring them." Emily's mother had not gone back to the farm. She'd been at the Hayes Ranch for 3 days by then, sleeping in the small room across from Emily's, and in that time, something had happened that Emily hadn't anticipated and couldn't have engineered deliberately. Her mother had simply become part of the household. Not formally, not with any discussion. Just the way things happen when a woman of 60 with good hands and long experience walks into a home that needs her. She and Anna had formed an alliance over the bread-making that was already reshaping the quality of morning in the house. The twins called her Miss Ruth without being told to. Sophie had said her name on the second morning, not Emmy this time, but a careful, considered Ruth, and Emily's mother had gone very still, and then excused herself to the back porch for 10 minutes, and when she came back, her eyes were red, but her face was composed. She produced her documents that afternoon, tied in twine in the particular order only she understood, and Calloway spread them on the table and went through them with the focused intensity of a man reading a confession. "There," he said, putting his finger on a line. "Right there. The penalty clause on the renewal. That rate isn't legal. Hasn't been legal in Kansas since 1869. He looked up. He knew that when he wrote it. "Can you prove he knew?" Daniel asked. "I can prove the rate," Calloway said. "Knowingly is for a jury." He sat back. "But I won't need a jury if enough families come forward. This many violations, the county prosecutor can't ignore it. Even Dunmore's friends have limits to how much protection they can offer when the paper trail is this clean." He left that evening for Halverson's store. Emily stood on the porch and watched him ride out and tried to feel certainty, and found something more honest instead, the particular kind of hope that knows it might still fail and chooses to hold on anyway. Daniel came and stood beside her. "How long?" she asked. "Calloway says 2 weeks to file. Maybe 3 before Dunmore knows the full shape of it." "And until then, he'll keep pressing," Daniel said. He doesn't know what we have yet. He'll push harder before he pulls back. She nodded. He said, "Your mother should stay." She looked at him. "She has the farm." "The farm is frozen through till April," he said. "She can't work it alone in winter anyway. And here—" He stopped. "It'd be easier. For Sophie, for Anna, for all of them." A pause that had weight in it. "For me." Emily held his gaze. "I'll ask her," she said. She did that night sitting across from her mother at the small table in her room with the lamp between them. Her mother listened, and then she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You love those children." Emily didn't answer. "Emily Ann Carter," her mother said not unkindly. "I have known you for 19 years. Don't you sit there and make me work for what's obvious." "I care about them," Emily said carefully. "Yes." "And their father." The lamp between them made the silence visible. "That's a different question," Emily said. "Is it?" Her mother folded her hands on the table, the same red cracked hands Emily had signed a contract to protect. "I've watched you these 3 days. I've seen how you move in this house, how you talk to those children, how you talk to him." She paused. "And I've seen how he watches you when you're not looking." Emily looked at the lamp. "Mama, I'm not saying it's simple," her mother said. "I'm saying it's real, and real things are worth more than simple things." She reached across the table and took Emily's hand. "I didn't send you out here to find that sweetheart, I know that. But if it found you anyway—" "The contract has 2 months left," Emily said. "The contract," her mother said firmly, "is a piece of paper. What's in this house is not a piece of paper." Emily looked at her mother's hands holding hers and thought about all the things that had led here. The drought, the debt, the cold. Morning in a stranger's office, the 14 miles through a blizzard, the door opening and the gray eyes of a man who didn't want to want help. She thought about biscuits with peach preserves and a bandaged arm and a small hand in the dark. "I'll think about it," she said. Her mother squeezed her hand and let go. "That's all I ask." Dunmore's response came faster than any of them expected, and it came not through Gibbs or Patterson or any of his usual machinery. It came through Dunmore himself, and it came to the one place Emily hadn't thought to guard. It was Lucas who told her. He came in from school on Thursday with his jaw set, and his face arranged in the careful blankness that she now understood meant he was holding something difficult. "They talked to me at school today," he said. "2 men. Outside the schoolhouse." Emily put down what she was doing. "What men?" "I didn't know them. They said they worked for the county office." He paused. "They said if the Hayes family continued to be uncooperative with the welfare inquiry, there were options available to the county regarding the children." The room went very quiet. "What options?" Daniel asked from the doorway. He'd come in from outside and was still holding his gloves. Lucas looked at his father. "Placement," he said. "They said placement with proper families. They said a household without a mother, and with a—" He hesitated. "A contracted woman in residence wasn't stable." Daniel's face went to stone. Emily looked at Lucas. "They approached you directly," she said. "A 14-year-old boy. Outside his schoolhouse." She said it slowly, not as a question, because the full awfulness of it needed to be spoken at its actual size. Lucas nodded. "They're frightened," Emily said. "Dunmore is frightened. That's what this is." She looked at Daniel. "Calloway got to Halverson. Halverson said yes. That got back to Dunmore. And now he's skipping his own process because the process is starting to work against him." "He threatened my son," Daniel said. Very quiet. The dangerous kind of quiet. "He threatened all of us," Emily said. "He's been doing it since before I got here, but this—" She looked at Lucas. "This tells us he's running out of legitimate tools. You don't send men to frighten a 14-year-old outside a schoolhouse when you have good legal options left. You do it when you're desperate." Lucas was watching her with those eyes that missed nothing. "So what do we do?" he said. "You go back to school tomorrow," she said. "You go back and you act like nothing happened, because nothing that those men said is going to happen. She held his gaze. "I promise you that." It was the first time she'd made that kind of promise. She meant every word of it. She just had to make sure she could keep it. She went to Calloway that same evening, riding out to where he was staying at the Halversons' place above the store in the cold and the dark with one of the Hayes horses and Daniel's instruction to take the lantern. Calloway listened to what she said with his glasses off and his full attention on her face. And when she finished, he said, "He's moving on the children." "Yes. That changes the timeline." He put his glasses back on. "I can file the initial documents Friday. It won't be the full case, but it'll be enough to get a judge's injunction against any county welfare action in the Hayes household pending the fraud investigation." "Friday," she said. "That's 2 days." 2 days, he confirmed. "Can you hold 2 days?" She thought about Daniel, about Lucas, about the twins and Anna and Sophie in her bed saying Emmy in the dark. "Yes," she said. She rode back in the cold and went to the kitchen and found Daniel awake at the table, which she'd expected because he was that kind of man, the kind who doesn't sleep when his children are threatened. She sat down and told him what Calloway had said. 2 days, he said. 2 days. He was quiet. Then, "I need you to know something." She waited. "When Dunmore first came to me, he said with the idea of the contract, I told myself it was just practical, just a solution to a problem. A woman to run the house a family helped out of debt, clean and simple." He looked at his hands on the table. "I told myself that because the alternative was admitting I'd let this house fall apart, that my children were suffering and I couldn't fix it. That Margaret had been gone 8 months, and I still hadn't figured out how to get out of bed in the morning without her." He stopped. "That's not something a man admits easy." Emily said nothing. She let him have the space. "You came in here," he said, "and you didn't try to replace her. You didn't try to make them love you. You just worked. You just showed up every day and did the next right thing. And somewhere in that, everything started moving again." He looked up. "My daughter speaks. My son trusts someone who isn't me. My boys eat their vegetables." The last one landed somewhere between grief and something that was trying to be laughter. Margaret would have called that a miracle. Emily's chest ached with the weight of what he was giving her. "It wasn't a miracle," she said softly. "It was just time and showing up." "Maybe those are the same thing," he said. And then, from down the hall, small and clear and absolutely certain, "Emmy." They both turned their heads toward the hallway. A pause. Then, "Emmy. Water." Sophie commanding the dark from her bed with the confidence of a child who has remembered that her voice works and has decided to use it fully. Emily stood up. But before she could go, Daniel caught her hand at the table, not grabbing just a touch, the same kind she'd given him when she needed him to stop and hear her. She stopped. She looked down at his hand over hers. "When this is over," he said. He stopped, looked at their hands, looked up at her. "When the contract's done, and Calloway's done what he came to do, I want to ask you something. Something that has nothing to do with any contract." Her heartbeat did something complicated. "Emmy." More insistent now from the hallway. Sophie had opinions about response time. Emily looked at Daniel Hayes, this man who had opened a door and shown her his flat gray eyes, and told himself she was temporary, and she understood something complete about what she was looking at. Not a perfect man, not a simple situation, but something real exactly like her mother had said, and real things were worth more than simple things. "Ask me," she said quietly. "When it's over, I'll be here." She went to Sophie. Calloway filed on Friday. By Saturday afternoon, the injunction was in place. By Monday, the county prosecutor's office had formally opened an inquiry into Dunmore's debt acquisition practices across 3 counties. By Tuesday, 4 families had come forward. By Thursday, it was 7. Dunmore did not come to the Hayes Ranch again. He sent a letter through his lawyer, formal and cold, informing Daniel Hayes that in light of ongoing legal proceedings, the contract with Miss Emily Carter was considered concluded, and no further financial obligation existed on either side. The letter said nothing about the water rights. It said nothing about the welfare inquiry. It said nothing about Emily's mother or Lucas outside the schoolhouse or any of the machinery he'd run so carefully for so long. Daniel read it twice and handed it to Emily without comment. She read it. She set it on the table. "It's over," Anna asked from across the room. She'd been at the window watching as she always was. "The worst of it," Daniel said. "Dunmore won't give up," Lucas said. He was at the table with his arms crossed. "Men like him don't just stop." "No?" Calloway said he was still at the table finishing his third cup of Emily's coffee, which he had declared the best in the county. "But there's a difference between a man who's hunting and a man who's defending. We've made him a man who's defending. That changes everything." Lucas considered that. Nodded slowly the way he nodded when something landed as true. Eli, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway with his brother, in matching seriousness, said, "Does this mean the lady from the county can't come anymore?" "The lady from the county," Emily said, "is going to have a great deal to think about other than us for the foreseeable future." Cal looked at Eli. Eli looked at Cal. Some twin communication passed between them that concluded in matching grins. It was that evening after Calloway had gone back to Halverson's and the children were in bed, all of them for once without incident, without Sophie waking, without anyone needing water or a bad dream attended to, that Daniel found Emily on the porch. She'd gone out for the cold and the quiet and the particular stillness of a Kansas night in late winter, when the worst of the season has broken its back and the air smells very faintly like it's considering spring. She heard the door and felt him come to stand beside her, and they stood together for a moment without speaking. "My mother is going to go back to the farm next week," Emily said. "The ground will start to soften. She'll want to be there." "I know," he said. "She'll be all right," Emily said. "With the debt cleared, she can make it through spring. If the seed price holds, she might even turn something this season." "I know," he said again, and his voice told her that this was not what he wanted to be talking about. She turned and looked at him in the dark. "The contract is concluded," he said. "That's what the letter says." "Yes." "So you're free to go," he said. "Any time. Today if you wanted." "I know that," she said. "Do you want to?" The question sat between them in the cold air, honest and simple and enormous. She thought about 19 years old and a signature on a winter morning and a wagon going north into the white. She thought about a door opening and gray eyes and 4 children like a wall between her and any comfortable version of this. She thought about all the things she'd built here, not the bread and the fires and the mended dresses, but the other things, the ones you can't list, the ones that accumulate in a house like warmth. "I told you," she said. "Ask me when it's over." "It's over," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Then ask me," she said. He looked at her in the dark, this man who didn't say things easily and meant every word he said. And he said, "Will you stay?" "Not under any contract, not because of any debt. Will you stay here with me and these children because you want to?" Emily Carter had been 19 years old when she pressed her hand flat against a paper and signed her name and walked out into a blizzard and told herself it was just a job. She'd been practical about it because she was a practical person, and she'd needed to be. She was still practical. She knew what she was saying yes to 4 children and a hard-headed man and a Kansas winter and a town that had whispered about her and might never fully stop. She knew it wouldn't always be easy, and she knew some days would be longer than the cold ride north, and she knew that loving people who had already lost someone meant accepting that love was also a kind of risk. She knew all of that. She said yes. He didn't move for a moment. Then he reached out and took her hand, and he held it the way you hold something you understand the value of. And he looked at her like a man looking at the thing he hadn't known he needed to survive until it was standing in front of him. "I can't promise it'll be easy," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking for easy." "I can promise—" He stopped. "I can promise that this is real. What I feel. It's real." "I know that too," she said. From inside, faint but clear, Emmy. Sophie, impossible child, not asleep at all. Emily almost laughed. She felt it move through her chest, warm and full, and completely unguarded the laugh of someone who has stopped bracing for the next blow. "I should go to her," she said. "You should," he agreed, and he didn't let go of her hand for one more moment. When she went inside, Sophie was sitting up in bed with her arms out, and her face arranged in the expression of someone who sees no reason why what she wants should not be immediately provided. Emily sat on the edge of the cot and held her, and Sophie tucked her dark head under Emily's chin and said with complete satisfaction, "Emmy, stay." Emily held her tighter. "Yes," she said. "Emmy, stay." Spring came the way it always comes to Kansas, not with fanfare, but with small insistences. A line of mud where the snow had been. A sound in the air that was almost but not quite birdsong. The particular smell of ground that has been cold for months and is beginning to remember what it was made for. Anna was the one who noticed the crocus first coming up through the frozen mud near the fence post, and she called the twins to look, and they tramped out in their boots and stood over it with the reverence young children have for small, impossible things. Lucas pretended not to care, and then stood at the window watching them for a long time with something soft around his eyes that he'd have argued against if anyone mentioned it. Emily's mother left on a Thursday with her documents in their twine bundle and a jar of peach preserves that Sophie had insisted on giving her and Emily's promise to write every week. She hugged Emily in the yard for a long time without speaking, and then she held Emily at arm's length and looked at her with the particular look of a mother who sees her daughter clearly for the first time in a long time. "You found something real," she said. "Yes," Emily said. "Good." She squeezed her arms once and let go and climbed into the wagon Daniel had arranged to take her back to Millhaven. Calloway's case moved forward through the spring steady as groundwater finding its level. 3 families filed formal complaints. The county prosecutor, faced with paper evidence that could not be argued around, opened a full investigation. Dunmore hired expensive lawyers, and the expensive lawyers earned their fee by extending every timeline and contesting every document, but the weight of it moved only one direction. He did not come to the Hayes Ranch again. He did not send anyone else. The town did not change overnight. Towns rarely do. But things shifted the way they shift when the story people have been telling about someone stops matching what they can see with their own eyes. Mrs. Aldridge nodded to Emily in Halverson's store one morning in March, with the stiff brevity of a woman conceding a point she'd made badly. Halverson himself told Emily she had an account there, now said it in the same careful, neutral voice he used for everything which she understood was his way of saying something important. Lucas turned 15 in April, and Daniel gave him responsibility for the eastern fence line as his own to manage, which was the Hayes version of a declaration, and Lucas received it with a handshake and no words, and both of them walked away satisfied. The twins learned to tell each other apart, without the scar system, which Anna said was cause for concern, because now they could coordinate. And Sophie, who had been silent as a stone for 7 months, who had watched her world go cold and locked her voice away somewhere deep against the cold, Sophie sang. It happened on a Saturday morning, simple as breathing, no announcement. Emily was at the stove, and Sophie was at the table, and the sound came out of her like it had always been there, just waiting for the room to be warm enough. A child's song half-remembered something her mother must have sung, a tune without all its words filled in, where the words were missing, with sounds that were close enough and sweet enough and entirely hers. Emily did not turn around. She stood at the stove and listened, and let the singing fill the kitchen, and she felt the full weight of every morning she had gotten up in this house and done the next right thing, and she understood that this was what all of it had been for, not the legal case, not the debt, not the contract concluded in a letter delivered through a lawyer. This kitchen, this child's voice finding its way back into the world. Daniel came in from the yard and stopped in the doorway. He listened. He looked at Emily, and she looked at him, and between them passed something that didn't need words, had never needed words, had been building itself out of mornings and small moments, and the patient daily work of 2 people deciding without saying it to trust the same future. Months later, when Calloway sent word that Dunmore had agreed to a settlement that returned clear title to the Hayes water rights and cleared every contested debt across all 11 affected families. Daniel read the letter aloud at the dinner table, The twins cheered. Anna allowed herself one full smile, which for Anna was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Lucas said, "About time," with the satisfaction of a young man who has been proven right about something he believed in before the evidence was complete. Sophie looked up from her plate and said, "Good," with the decisive calm of a 4-year-old who has been following the situation more closely than anyone realized and has opinions about outcomes. Emily Carter looked around that table at those 4 children who had been a wall and were now a family, at the man across from her who had opened a door and looked at her with flat gray eyes and told himself she was temporary. And she thought about a contract signed on a cold morning for $300. And she thought about all the things that could not be bought or sold or written into any document. She had come to this house as a line in a ledger. She had become something that had no price. Not because anyone had given her that. Not because a contract had expired, or a debt had been cleared, or a judge in Hayes City had filed the right papers at the right time. Because she had shown up every morning and done the next right thing and refused every single time she was given the opportunity to shrink to be anything less than exactly who she was. She had been traded like a transaction. She had become the foundation of a home. And in the end, that was the only truth that mattered. She had not been purchased into this family. She had built it, one quiet day at a time with her own 2 hands,